This honors geometry lesson is on section 11.3, the midpoint formula. The objective is to state and apply the midpoint formula that can be used to find any midpoint of a segment. You can see that the midpoint M of segment AM has a coordinate of 1, which is the average of -1 and 3. We have already learned that the midpoint of a segment can be found by using the following formula. To find the midpoint of any segment, in this case segment AB, we're going to take the coordinate A, which is -1, plus the coordinate B, which is 3, and find the average. So -1 plus 3 divided by 2 gives me a midpoint value of 1. It is very easy to find the midpoint of 2 points that lie on a horizontal line or a vertical line. Let's start with a horizontal line. The midpoint value for the y value of any horizontal line will be the same as the y value of the endpoint. So in this case, we know that C and E have a y value of 2, therefore the midpoint y value must also be 2. In order to find the x value, we're going to find the midpoint, or the average, of the x values for C and E. So C has an x value of -1, E has an x value of 5, so -1 plus 5 divided by 2 gives me a midpoint value of the x at coordinate 2. So therefore the midpoint of segment CE is at point D, which has an ordered pair of 2, 2. For a vertical line, the x value of the midpoint will always be the same as the x value of the endpoint. So in this case, we know that the x value for the midpoint of FH is going to be at -1. So to find the midpoint value of the y, we're going to take the average of the y values of endpoint F and H. So F has an endpoint value of y at 1. H has a y value of -3. So if we take 1 plus -3 and divide that in half, we're going to get -2 divided by 2, or -1. So therefore, we now know that the midpoint of segment FH is at point G, which has an ordered pair of -1, -1. You can use this idea to find the coordinates of the midpoint of any slanting segment that have endpoints at point 1, which we're going to call x1 and y1, and point 2, which we're going to call x2 and y2. To find the midpoint of any 2 points, so point 1 and point 2, you can use the midpoint formula. The midpoint formula says you take the x values, so x1 plus y1, and average them. And you also take the y values, which is y1 plus y2, and average them as well. And that will give you the midpoint. Let's take a look at example 1. We're going to find the midpoint of the line segment that joins ordered pairs -11, 3 and ordered pair 8, -7. So we're going to go ahead and call -11 x1, and we're going to call 3 y1. We're also going to label 8 as our x2 and -7 as our y2. So now we can go ahead and use our midpoint formula. So the midpoint of this segment is going to be x1 plus x2, so -11 plus 8, divided by 2. And our y value of the midpoint is going to be y1 plus y2, which is 3 plus -7. So the midpoint of the line segment that is joined by these two endpoints is going to be at a -11 plus 8, which is 3, so 3/2 for the x value, and 3 plus -7, which is -4, and -4 divided by 2 is -2. So the midpoint between these two endpoints is at the ordered pair 3/2 and -2. With example 2, we are given the midpoint is at ordered pair 2, -3 of segment AB, where A has the coordinates, which we're going to call the x1 and y1 value, at -5 and 1, and we're going to find the coordinates for B. So remember the midpoint formula tells us to take x1 plus x2 divided in half, and then y1 plus y2 divided in half, and that's going to give us our midpoint. So we're going to go ahead and fill in what we know. So we have the midpoint values. We have x1 and y1. We need to find x2 and y2. So we're going to set up a little equation inside our ordered pairs. So we know that x1 is negative 5. We do not know what x2 is, but we know that if we divide that in 2, it's going to give us our midpoint value of 2. We're going to do the same thing to find our y value. We know that y1 has an ordered pair or y value of 1. We don't know the y2 value, but we know that if we divide by 2, that's going to give us a midpoint value of negative 3. Let me just erase that. And now what we can do is we can use our algebra in order to find the missing value for x2 and y2, which are going to be the coordinates of B. So for the first example, we're going to multiply both sides by 2. So we're going to have negative 5 plus x squared equals 4. We're going to do the same thing for the y value. So 1 plus y2 is going to equal negative 6. And now we can just simply solve our one-step equation. So if we add negative 5, or add 5 to both sides, we're going to get that the x2 value is actually at 9. And if we subtract 1, we're going to get that the y2 value is at negative 7. So now we know that the midpoint of 2, negative 3, where A has coordinates of negative 5, 1, must have B coordinates at 9, negative 7. That is the end of the lesson. If you have any questions, watch the video for a second time. If you still have questions, write down any of those clarification questions that you may have and bring them to the next class.